I'm a very informal speaker, which means that stop me at any time if you have a question, shout it out, raise your hand, it doesn't matter. But don't let me go on and you not understand something. I'm really, really very informal. This is quite a difference. I usually just sit on a desk in a student classroom and just kind of schmooze is the word that I'm looking for. Being told to give a speech on the Holocaust is difficult when especially you're told, probably the audience doesn't know anything about it. So where do you start? How do you start to teach about the Holocaust? It's probably impossible, of course, to do this in 1 hour. But let's start with a scenario. Raise your hand when you recognize it, okay? It's a foreign country, let's call it A. And the people who live there are quite wealthy. They have a lot of food, they have a lot of business industry of a type. But Group B moves in. They're there first for a visit, but then they settle down. They get married, they intermarry sometimes, they raise their children, they reproduce. And after a while, the leader of country A is not too happy about the situation. So what is he going to do? He can't just throw out thousands of people. He can't just tell them, I don't like you anymore, goodbye. So he starts very slowly. He starts to tax them, exorbitant taxes that the citizens of A don't have to pay. But now these people, the B people, have to pay the taxes. They're not very happy, but what are they going to do? There's no alternative. And then it gets worse. He tells them, you have to stay in this area. I don't want you encroaching on my territory unless you're helping me to do something like build something. Now, if you're building for me and working for me, then you can come and stay in my area. But other than that, you're going to stay in your area and you're going to do the jobs that I tell you to do. And this goes on. And slowly the people get used to it, so that the generations being born think, well, this is what I'm supposed to do. And it gets worse. He makes them slaves. Now they're working for him, but he's not paying them. And he's making it harder and harder. Anybody recognize this yet? Somebody must. You do, okay. You do? Your answer?
Egypt.
Where?
Egypt.
Egypt, of course. This is the story of Moses and the Pharaoh. The story of the people who are living in Egypt who are hated by the leader. And what does he do? He puts them in an area that they have to stay in. He starves them. He works them to death. And eventually he gets to that final step, which is genocide, the killing of the firstborn. Here, though, is where we have a little bit of a difference. Because although the midwives were told to kill the firstborn of the Israelites, the midwives refused, and his genocide failed. Unfortunately, you can see the parallel with that and the Holocaust, where someone rises to power who decides he's going to find a scapegoat for everything that is wrong. Have you studied history? You know the story of World War I. Germany was decimated. People were hungry. People had no jobs. Soldiers coming back from the war had nothing. Stock market crash. The world was in a depression. Germany was in a pit of despair. So what do you do when people are down? You have to build them up. And you build up your national spirit. Let's build up the German spirit. Nothing wrong with that. But what they do is they do it at the expense of somebody else. Those of you that are not, those of you that have siblings know how easy it is to say, he did it. He did it. The dog did it. I mean, my kids used to blame the dog for opening the refrigerator and taking out ice cream and didn't understand why I didn't believe them. So we always like to have a scapegoat. Nobody likes to get blamed for anything. And with the Jews, you had a good scapegoat. So what I'd like to do to start is to go back and answer the question, why did he pick on the Jews? Why didn't he pick other people? Which he did. But it was only the Jews that he wanted to murder wholesale. The only state-sponsored genocide of that time. Unfortunately, there were more coming. And if you want to go back to Pharaoh in Egypt, that was a state-sponsored genocide as well. It just didn't work. So let's talk about why the Jews. I'm going to have to need my notes for a second. One thing I hate is people reading to me, so I promise you I'm not going to read to you. I've always hated that. Especially when you go to a meeting and they put the words up on the board, and then they read it to you like you're too stupid to read it yourself. They do that at teachers' meetings. So if any of you are going to be a teacher, let me tell you, that's what happens. Anyway, back on track. The word chosen, the Jews were supposedly the chosen people. But like anything, things get misinterpreted. The Jews were not chosen by God to be his people. It was the Jews who chose God, who agreed to his 10 Commandments, who agreed to what he wanted them to do. So it's actually the other way around. But if you talk to anyone, and that includes Jews today, they'll think that they were chosen, that God said, you will be my people and my only people. And of course, you'd be resentful, just like if your parents said, well, I like you, but I don't like your brother. You'd be happy, but your brother would be a little bit ticked off. And so you have people resentful of the Jews because supposedly they were the chosen people. Fear of their power, and here we go back to Egypt and Pharaoh. What was Pharaoh afraid of? Afraid that the Jews would rise up. So he had to kill the men, because the men were the warriors. And the men were needed in those days to reproduce. No men, no babies. That's one way to get rid of a people. Jews were different from the beginning. They had rules. They weren't just a religion, they had rules. You could only eat certain foods. Now, some of these rules have come down to today. You could only eat certain foods. On Shabbat, which is Friday night to Saturday night, you weren't allowed to do any work, and that included making a fire, depending on the time, any kind of work. And that gets in the way in modern day world as well, if you cannot work on the Sabbath. They weren't allowed to intermarry. They had the 10 Commandments, which not everyone had. They had prayers, and the prayers were fine, but they were in a language. There you have it up there. Zachor, remember. They prayed in Hebrew, so nobody could understand them. Have you ever been to a service or a speech where somebody was talking in a foreign language and you felt very strange, very uncomfortable, because you didn't know what they were saying? So people were uncomfortable with this. They prayed in Hebrew or in Aramaic. They would not become part of a different religion. The Jews did not want to convert. They didn't want to become Christians later on. They didn't want to become Muslims even further on. Zoroastrianism. They did not want to convert. Sometimes they were forced to, by sword, not by choice. They would not accept new cultures. When the Greeks came into Palestine, the Greek culture became the culture of the land. One of the things they do is they practice running in the nude. The first Olympics, everyone was in the nude. That was all men, of course. But the first Olympics, they were all nude. They don't talk about that a lot. See if they mention it in the next week when the Olympics start. But the first Olympics, think about it. And the Jews wouldn't do that. Now, when I say they wouldn't do that, there were some who did, okay? There's always an exception. But the majority did not. They would not bow down to the Roman gods. The Jews have one God, monotheism. They would not accept Zeus and Hera and all of the other gods. They would not convert to Christianity. Let's go back here. The story of Jesus and his arrest, his trial, and his crucifixion. For thousands and thousands of years, the Jews were blamed for this, for his death. Even the popes came out and said that, and it's only in recent years that that rule has been rescinded. But a man named St. John Chrysostom, sorry, that's not a familiar name to me, who said that the Jews killed Christ in the 4th century, and people believed it. And so Christian children grew up believing that Jews were Christ killers. The first girl I met when I went to college, now we're talking a long time ago, but the first girl I met when I went to college said to me, "You're Jewish?" Because I always wear my star. I said, "Yes." She said, "Well, where are your horns?" I don't know where they are. Where are they supposed to be? She actually thought Jews had horns. That's what she'd been taught. 4 weeks ago, I went to Swansea High School to talk to some kids for an interview. And at the end of it, the girl said to me, "You know what? You were nice." I said, "Well, what did you expect? The Wicked Witch of the West?" She said, "No, but you're Jewish." And I thought, I wonder what she's been taught. What kind of stereotype does she have? That she was surprised that I was nice to her. You have the Muslims and the Crusaders. On their way to the Crusades, the Christians killed the Jews that they found in the villages and the cities along the way. When they got to Jerusalem, they killed the Muslims that were there, and if there were Jews there, collateral damage. But they did slaughter on the way to the Crusades. We have something called the blood libel. Do you know what matzah is? Anyone who doesn't know what matzah is? Raise your hand, please. You don't? Okay. It's unleavened bread. Looks like a cracker, tastes like sawdust. Okay, unless you put jelly on it. But this is what the Jews ate when they left Egypt. This is what we eat today during our 8-day Passover. In Europe, they started what we call the blood libel, that Jews would go out and kill a little Christian kid in the village, take his blood and bake it in the matzah. Totally absurd, but people believed it. So every year at Easter time, which usually corresponds with Passover, the Jews would hide in their homes because the Christians would come out and murder them. People believed the story that Jews killed little Christian children. Jews were only allowed certain jobs in the Middle Ages, and one of them was being a money lender. And you know today that who has the money has the power. And if your king is dependent upon you for money, then you have the power to say yes or no if he wants to wage a war. Read Merchant of Venice, where you have Shylock. There's the stereotypical Jew with the big nose, greedy, always wants money. A stereotype. These are not the only reasons, but many of the reasons that the Germans, Hitler of course in particular, wanted to kill the Jews. What was his master plan? He wanted a master race, the Aryan race, which doesn't exist. Aryan is a language. It's a part of a language group. It's not a racial group. But he wanted his blonde, blue-eyed boys. Notice what he looked like, though? I've never understood that. The paradox of he wanting this blonde, blue-eyed, athletic, healthy-looking person, and he was, I would say, quite the opposite. But this is what he wanted. Now, how do you get that? Think about breeding. You have to breed out the people. You have to breed out the bad seeds to get the master race that you want. This is what he wanted. And he did it, you know, as much as I dislike, and I hate to use the word hate, but dislike the man, he was very smart in what he did. He got himself a cadre of men who were able to put out propaganda so that the people of Germany believed the same thing that Hitler did, which was the Jews are bad for us. They are not even on the hierarchy of people. They're not even people, they're vermin. Vermin. And what do you do with vermin? You eradicate them. You get rid of them. But how do you get the people to believe this? Propaganda. Goebbels was his propaganda chief. Wrote books, wrote articles, told people over and over, taught children. You know how easy it is to change a child's mind? They're very malleable. You keep telling them that these certain people are like vermin, like mice, like rats to be gotten rid of, and they're going to believe it. Put them in a youth group where they're taught to fight, where they've got their German pride back again, and they're willing to do almost anything. And this is how it started, slowly, just like the Pharaoh in Egypt. It didn't just happen overnight. What did he start with? When did the Holocaust start? Anybody have a date?
Officially, 1939.
Not 39. Earlier. 1933. We'll go when Hitler came into power. Nuremberg laws. Okay? These were the laws. Jews lost their jobs. They lost their homes. Lost their possessions. Kids couldn't have their bicycles. Women had to give up furs and jewelry, radios. Jewish people could only go to Jewish doctors. They had to give up some of their maids. And for the people who weren't that wealthy, it was a problem. But again, what was the philosophy? It'll pass. Just like today, when people say, he's only got 3 more years to go. We'll get rid of him then. We'll have another president. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. So the Jews weren't terribly upset. They didn't like it. But for the most part, Jews were assimilated. They were very German. A lot of them fought in the German army. One of the reasons that Anne Frank's family got treated nicely, and I use that with parentheses around, with quotation marks around it, when they were arrested, when they raided the secret annex, was when they opened one of the trunks, they discovered that Mr. Frank had been a soldier, a decorated soldier in World War I. The people considered themselves German first. Some of them didn't celebrate the holidays. I'll show you, I have a chart, and I know you won't be able to see a lot of it, but you can come up later and look. These are the racial, I'm not going to do that again. These are the racial laws to determine who is a Jew. It means that some of you in here may have a grandparent or a great-grandparent who was Jewish, and you don't know it. According to Hitler, you are Jewish. It meant that you could be a Catholic priest, but if one of your great-grandparents was Jewish, you were considered Jewish. People who had no idea what Judaism meant were considered to be Jewish, and it was printed in their identity cards. You could not intermarry, another rule. And it got harder and harder. Eventually, what does he do? Hitler, I'm talking about. We have Kristallnacht, the night of the broken glass, where thousands of synagogues were destroyed in a quote-unquote spontaneous, planned raid. And then the Jews were arrested and taken to jail. And then insult upon insult, they were told they had to pay for the damage. Any damage that was done to the stores and to the synagogues, they had to pay for. Kristallnacht, 1938. They were put into ghettos. Now, the word ghetto originally just meant a small area around a factory where all the workers lived, so they'd be close to the factory and they could get there on time to work. But the ghettos here were a little bit different. They were forced out of their homes into the ghetto. And the ghettos were then sealed off. The people starved to death. Some of them could not work. Some of them were able to get out of the ghetto and work. Some of them were able to escape. Some of them actually had uprisings. The Warsaw Ghetto had an uprising that nearly toppled the German army at one point. Very few people survived that, but some people did, surviving the Warsaw Ghetto uprising. Wannsee. Anyone ever been to Germany here? You know where Wannsee is? It's a beautiful, beautiful suburb right outside of Berlin. It's gorgeous. It's where the wealthy live. You go to this house there and there's a lake. And if you walk along the paths of Wannsee, when we were there were foxes just walking. I don't know how dangerous foxes are. I grew up in Philly, so I have no idea about foxes. But they were just walking there all through the gardens. This is where the conference for the final solution was. What was the final solution? Not just a concentration camp, not just a work camp, but a death camp. The murdering of 9 to 12 million Jews. Systematic murder. Government endorsed murder of these people. It started out slowly. Einsatzgruppen, which were wandering groups that went to different villages and took the people out to the side of the road in the forest and shot them. Then they started having, not sure what you'd call them, roving cars filled with carbon monoxide. They'd put the people inside the truck, put the hose in, 20 minutes later they were dead. But this was too slow. And killing people by the side of a gorge was wasting bullets, because the Germans needed the bullets for the real war that was going on in Europe. So they came up with something called Zyklon B, which was an insecticide. It was for killing vermin. And they built these camps. And they built them with gas chambers where they could fit many, many people in at one point. Drop the pellets down. 20 minutes later, depending on the strength of the Zyklon B, the people were dead. Then the Jews came in and took the people out, took out their gold teeth, cut hair, took any valuables that people might have hidden. And then depending on the camp, the bodies were taken to a very big pit and thrown into a pit. Or they were taken to a crematorium where they were burned. And then the ashes sometimes would float in the air. You've seen Schindler's List? There's a scene in Schindler's List where it looks like it's snowing, but it's actually the ashes from the crematoriums. It was an efficient killing machine. It's exactly what it was. They worked out the details meticulously. Train goes in, train goes out. Train stops here, and then you have what's called selection. A man standing in the middle saying, you go one side, you go to the other. One side was life, if you want to call it that. One side was death. Have you read the book Night by Elie Wiesel? You know how he describes coming to Auschwitz that first night? And the train, it's actually not Auschwitz, the train actually goes to Birkenau, which was the second of the third camps. Auschwitz was a couple miles away. But the train went right through, if you remember the scene in Schindler where it goes through the gate, it went right through and it stops right before a swamp. And the people got out and they lined up. If you go there today, you can stand in the exact same spot that Elie Wiesel stood. And you can look to your left and you look to your right, and there are the ruins of 2 of the gas chambers. These 2 were destroyed by some of the prisoners. They got some explosives and they were able to destroy it. Then they were murdered, of course. But you can see it's very close. It's not much farther than that wall from the train where they were given their left or right. And you can see, and you can actually walk down to where the people walk down into the gas chamber. Straight ahead into the swamp, you can see where the pit was. Do you remember the pit in night, where they were burning children? It was easy to burn children, to burn anyone, because the fat from the bodies made the fire even stronger. You can see now the pit's not there, obviously, but you can see these things if you go to Birkenau. You can walk in the steps of the people that walk there. If you go to Majdanek, they have a big well at the end of one of the main paths. And you go up to the well and you look down, and they have in there the ashes that the Allied forces cleaned up when they cleaned up the camps. And the ashes are in there. We walked through one of the camps and found little bits of bone in some of the roads that we walked. This was his master plan: to kill, to murder all of the Jews of Europe. It wasn't good enough to just throw them out. You would think it would be, get rid of them. But it wasn't. He wanted to murder them. Now, they also killed other people. Let's not get that wrong. Gypsies were experimented upon. Dr. Mengele especially liked gypsies and twins. And they had little villages of the gypsies were the only ones they kept together. Family groups. Everyone else was separated. Gypsies he kept together, but they were decimated. Political prisoners. There's a camp near Berlin called Sachsenhausen that housed political prisoners. He didn't like Jehovah's Witnesses because they wouldn't pledge their allegiance to him. They're not allowed to. So he imprisoned them. Definitely didn't like homosexuals. Male homosexuals. At first he thought they could be rehabilitated, and I'm not even going to go into some of the things he did with that. But he thought they could be rehabilitated. He murdered thousands of male homosexuals, including men who were in his own group. Women he didn't care about too much. He only arrested, I believe, 150. He went after everyone, children, 1.5 million children murdered in Auschwitz. There was a camp called Theresienstadt, which is in the Czech Republic. This was supposed to be the model camp. This was the camp they showed the Red Cross when the Red Cross went in and said, oh, well, we need to see what's going on here. And if you go to this camp, now, people came to this camp, they had an orchestra there, they had art, they had poetry. I Never Saw Another Butterfly. Do you know that story? That's written by a little boy, Pavel, I forget his last name, who wrote this story. They went from Theresienstadt to Auschwitz. Out of thousands of children that went through Theresienstadt, 100 survived, only 100. But it was the camp that they showed the Red Cross. If you go there today, you will see a beautiful bathroom, about half the size of this room, with beautiful, immaculate white sinks all the way around. And this is what the Red Cross was shown. Look at this, we have a beautiful bathroom, we have sinks for everyone. What you didn't notice, and what we didn't notice either, was there's no pipe underneath the sink to connect the water. It was just a sink. So there was no water. It was all for show. But this was his final solution. He met with his top brass. They came up with what they were going to do, to whom they were going to do it, how they were going to do it. He knew that if he got caught, he'd be in trouble. So every single copy of the minutes, any notes that anyone took during that meeting were destroyed, except one. They have one extant copy of this. Someone who was able to smuggle it out, which is how we know. Let's talk about genocide. Definition of genocide, anybody? Come on, guys, it's not a classroom. No grades. What's genocide? Give me a ballpark answer. Yes, Ken.
You take a class of people who have similarities and annihilate them.
Okay, how can you annihilate them? Just kill them? Is that the only type of genocide?
Well, there is cultural genocide.
Okay.
There's other type of works where you wipe out evidence and memories of traditions.
As China did with Tibet, a cultural genocide. Did you say
I
something?
couldn't understand all that.
About
Definition of genocide.
I'm going to give you a definition of genocide. Okay? This is the formal. Do you know the word didn't even exist before 1944? There was no word genocide. It was made up by someone named Raphael Lemkin, who took two Greek words, side, for killing, and geno, meaning people. Seems very logical now, but unfortunately, in 1944, there was a reason to coin that word. So here's the definition of genocide, according to the United Nations. These are acts committed with intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group. How can we do this? You can kill members of the group. That's obvious. You can cause serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group. You don't have to kill them to commit genocide. You can deliberately inflict on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. If you know about the famines that the Russians propagated in Armenia and some of the countries, they starved the people and killed them by taking away their food. They didn't physically come in and kill them, but when you take away their food and their sustenance, of course they're going to die. Imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group. It's a type of birth control. Some people feel that's genocide. Forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. That's what the Chinese did to the Tibetans. They took the kids in Tibet, took them back to China, raised them there, gave them propaganda, and then returned them to Tibet, where they were now more Chinese than Tibetan, thereby destroying the Tibetan culture, as well as destroying anything that had anything to do with Tibetan culture. Look at Cambodia. Pol Pot. He killed people because they wore glasses, because he figured people that wore glasses were smarter than other people. He killed teachers. He killed people that went to university. He killed people that spoke different languages, more than one language. What did he want? He wanted an agrarian society. He wanted a bunch of farmers that wouldn't argue with any of his rules. So he destroyed a whole population of people. There's a good movie called The Killing Fields, if you're interested in Cambodia. Dith Pran, the man who was the helper to the reporter, came to visit a couple years ago when I was doing my master's in Holocaust. Stands about this high, must weigh 70 pounds, and has forgiven everyone. But he told a story that stuck with me for some reason about how hungry he was. You ever get something stuck in your tooth? Bothers you, doesn't it? Get a seed stuck in your tooth or something that you've eaten, right? Dith Pran told us that when he got something stuck in his tooth, he kept it there for days if he could, because to him that was food. And sometimes that was the only food he had. He ate the bark off trees. I remember him telling us that. These are all genocides. Did they start with the Holocaust? No. Did they end with the Holocaust? That's even more important. Do we have genocides today? Oh, yeah. Do we study them? Not so much. Is that a problem? Definitely. This is one of the reasons why we teach Holocaust. We have just hired in the state of South Carolina a woman whose name I cannot remember, from the Holocaust Museum in DC, who is now going to be in charge of Holocaust education for the entire state. She's being paid by the Department of Education to look over the curriculum and the teaching of Holocaust. First time that we've had this. Not many states do, because we don't mandate teaching of Holocaust. I'm assuming that most of you are not teachers, but in the curriculum, there's very little about Holocaust in the middle school and high school curriculum. When I taught here, I only taught for 5 years in South Carolina, but the social studies curriculum only has one day where they study Holocaust. I taught English. I was able to get it in through teaching poetry. So now we have someone who's going to be in charge of this. Should be interesting to find out what's going to happen. A question I often get asked: did anybody resist? Did anybody say no? Did anybody try to stop this? Now, I told you that back in Egypt, the genocide didn't work because the midwives refused. They were afraid of God, they said. And so they didn't kill the Israelite boys. Hitler started off with something called the T4 experiment, where he euthanized people who were blind, deaf, mentally incapacitated, physically incapacitated. He just wholesale killed them, called it euthanasia. Again, trying to weed out. But the church argued, you cannot do this. And they put up a big stink about it, and you know what? Hitler stopped. He stopped the T4 officially. Now, some of it still went on, but the government was no longer endorsing it. Did any government say to the Germans, you can't do this? Study the history of the United States during this time. Did they know about it? Oh, yeah, they did. Did they do anything about it? They refused. Franklin Roosevelt would not help. They asked him to bomb the tracks going into some of the camps so that the trains couldn't get through. He refused. U.S. would not get involved. Did anybody take in the people that were trying to get out, desperately trying to get out of Germany, Austria, Hungary? Well, not Hungary till the very end.
Turned them away.
They turned them away. Every single country. They had a conference, the Evian conference, and agreed that nobody was going to take these refugees. Sound familiar? Nobody taking refugees? Think about it. 2017, 2018, it's in the news. Refugees. What do? Do we do the same thing? Look at the story of the St. Louis, a boat that left Europe, went to Cuba, where some people had visas to go in. Everyone else was turned away. About 6 people got in. They went up the coast of the United States, refused at every point, back to Europe. And guess what happened to them then? Dispersed and into camps. Nobody would do anything. People sent, now, let's go back. I won't say nobody then. There were what we call 4 types of people. Victims, obviously. Perpetrators. Bystanders. People that watch something and just say, I'm not getting involved. Or, I'm not getting hurt. Some of you may be old enough to remember a woman named Kitty Genovese in New York, who was murdered in the middle of a New York street while 38 people watched out of their windows and not one picked up a phone to call the police, figuring, I'm not getting involved, or somebody else do it. I don't remember what year that was. These are the bystanders. Are the Germans bystanders? In some cases, yes. In some cases, they were perpetrators. France, Austria, Lithuania, the Ukraine, France in particular. Not all the Germans were the bad guys, a lot of the French were. And then we have what we call the upstanders. These are the people that helped. You know their names. Schindler, who saved all those people. He was a horrible guy. You know that ring at the end where he gets that beautiful gold ring that they took the guy's tooth out for? Do you remember this in the movie? Have you seen it? Okay. That beautiful gold ring that says, "He who saves one saves the world." He hocked it the next day to buy liquor. That's how much it meant to him. And yet he was supported by his Jews until he died. He's buried in Jerusalem. You can go to his grave. It's a little Catholic cemetery, and you can go to his grave and put a stone on it. Wallenberg, Raoul Wallenberg, who gave visas, Swedish visas, to anyone that he could until he was arrested by the Russians and never seen again. We have no idea for sure what happened to him. One man who saved thousands. Sugihara, a Japanese man who also gave visas and saved thousands. There were people who helped. You know I'm sure you know the story of Anne Frank. You know that there were 4 people who brought them food and aspirins and whatever else they needed. Very, very difficult to do because they had ration books. You can all of a sudden start feeding 7 people. Very dangerous. Think to yourself what you would do if the situation came that way. How would you react? Would you help? Would you say no? Would you say, I can't do it because they're going to hurt my family? It's a difficult question to answer. But there were bystanders, there were people that helped. There were also people that resisted. The people in the Warsaw Ghetto, as I told you, who had an uprising. They had guns. They had some kind of grenades. And it was a ragtag group of people, maybe 30 or 40 of them, who fought off the German army for a couple days. German army was surprised. They didn't expect that. Did they die? Yeah, most of them did. Did the Warsaw Ghetto get dispersed? Absolutely. But they resisted. The partisans in the forest, people who went in and committed sabotage, who threw things into trains, who worked in factories and didn't build the things the way they were supposed to. You know the word sabotage? Where does that come from? What is a sabot? Does anybody know? Okay. Sabot is a wooden shoe. You've seen them, the little Dutch wooden shoes. Well, they wore them during World War II because you couldn't afford leather. And so a lot of the people in all of the countries wore these wooden shoes. And what they would do was they would take the shoe off and throw it in the machinery. Now, what's that going to do to the machinery? It's going to stop it. And so we got the word sabotage, to throw a shoe into the works. I think that's the greatest definition ever of a word. Sabotage. People did that. In the ghettos, they had schools. They had kids learning. They had religious services. They celebrated the holidays. Even in the camps, they celebrated when they could. One of the holidays called Yom Kippur, you have to fast for 25 hours. Not very pleasant, even if it's 2018. But think about it, when you're surviving on about 250 calories a day, what's going to happen if you don't eat for 25 hours? And yet these people made the decision, do I fast, do I not? It's something that they had to decide. They lit candles for Hanukkah. They tried to make matzah for Passover. They tried to celebrate. And again, in the ghettos, they had schools, they had orchestras. I think the movie's called Playing for Time, about one of the orchestras in one of the camps. They did what they could, because there's one thing that they can't take away from you. And that's your mind and your spirit and your soul. He tried. They tried desperately to dehumanize everyone. They took away their names, gave them a number. Now, not every camp had a number, okay? Primarily it was Auschwitz. Not every camp had numbers, so that you do have survivors without these tattoos on them. But they took away their names, then they took away their hair. That's part of your personality, isn't it, your hair? You ever recognize someone from the back of their head? Sure, you can do that. They took away your clothing. They gave you ragtag clothes, not necessarily uniforms, but ragtag clothes that didn't fit. They told you when you could get up and when you could sleep. They told you when you could go to the bathroom. They told you what you could eat. They told you what you could work, how you could do things. They took away every choice that you have, which makes us who we are. But the people who fought back kept their mental spirit, kept their soul. Read Viktor Frankl. He talks about that in his book. Look at Elie Wiesel again. Did he come out hating God? No. Did he question God? Yes. Yes. And in the Jewish religion, you're allowed to question God. You may not like the answer, but part of our religion is you can get to question God. Remember Job? He did. And he got rewarded in the end. So these are the things that went on from 1933 to 1945. Most of the killing occurred in 1942. Everything went down after that. Most of the people were killed in the camps in 1942. 1945, of course, the war was over. The camps were liberated, and then what happened? These people had nowhere to go. Most of their families were dead. If they returned to their villages, their homes were gone, and nobody wanted them there. They had nowhere to go. And again, a problem with the refugees. Where do they go? Who would take them in? And a lot of them were killed when they returned to their homes. Anti-Semitism doesn't just stop at the end of the Holocaust. One last thing. Let me check my time here. Not bad, okay. Eugenics. You know what eugenics is? The study of people and reproduction and the weeding out of degenerates, supposedly. Look up the names of some of the people who believed in eugenics. The one that shocked me, Oliver Wendell Holmes, a big proponent of murdering children who are born what we used to call retarded, mentally challenged, physically challenged. Murdering them, not just aborting. We're talking about murdering live children. Margaret Sanger, the lady who championed birth control. The Kellogg Foundation, the ones that make all those sugary cereals that the kids love, funded lots of studies for eugenics. People believe that if you weeded out the weak, the mentally challenged, then it would be a better world. People believe that you could kill certain people to prevent crimes. If you study the story of crimes and what the psychology of criminals, they believed that if you killed them, then that would solve it because it was carried down in the genes. It was hereditary. This is the story of what he was doing. And why do we study it? The man from Channel 13 or whatever asked me earlier. He said, why do you do this? Why is it important? And I told him, because it didn't stop 70 years ago. Because it goes on today. Look at the news. The refugee crisis. People being stereotyped when they come from a certain country. I mean, this is pretty obvious. It still goes on today. So my question to you is, are you going to be a bystander or an upstander? Are you going to just let it happen, or are you going to do something? Even if it means donating money, or going to a march, or writing a letter or an email. Can we stop it? I don't know. You'd have to have a lot of upstanders to stop some of this. Okay. Do you have any questions? I'm not a scholar, okay? I'm just someone who's very interested in Holocaust. I do have a degree in it, but don't ask me dates, places, things like that. That stuff I look up on Google. I'm more interested, my emphasis actually was on the sexual treatment of women during the Holocaust. This is what I've written most of my papers on. In the ghettos, in the camps, afterwards in the towns. Assaults by Germans, assaults by the Russians, and assaults by other Jews. Sexual harassment, almost like what we're watching on TV today. Those of you that watched the sentencing of Larry, who got his, 175 years, which wasn't half enough. But they did it during World War II also. Jews on Jews, harassing them. And in the camps and everywhere. So that's what my emphasis has been. So I'm more interested in the people. So please don't ask me questions about in such and such a date, blah, blah, blah. So, I've talked enough. No questions? Question.
Would you consider the story told in the book of Esther, where Mordecai and Esther were able to save the Jews from Haman's nefarious plan? Was that an averted Holocaust also?
Yes, I would say so. It would have been a genocide of the Jews, but read the end of the story and see what the Jews did to the Persians. It's a story they don't always tell. I never realized that till a couple of years ago, because the Jews turned around and murdered all of them.
Well, I described it as an averted Holocaust.
Yes, because of Haman.
Isn't it interesting? So there's been at least 3 attempted Holocausts. One being very successful, the German, but
Okay.
then there was also the Egyptian and whatever the country that the Jews were in the book of Esther.
Persia.
Yeah.
I would think there's even more than that.
Ma'am?
I would say there's even more than that.
Yeah, but those are the ones we know about.
They are, but also during the Crusades. Not as organized, but still killing all the Jews as they marched to Jerusalem. The pogroms in Russia, where they were also government-sponsored and privately sponsored, also a type of Holocaust. The word Holocaust really isn't a good word, because it means conflagration, a big fire. Most of the time we use the word Shoah, which is a little bit different. So, but yeah, there have been averted genocides, and we'd hope to keep averting them. That would be my plan. Yes, back there.
Yes, you said that to help promote the Nazi theology of children, they're easily influenced. Do you know how they influenced young children about it? What they did to make them think?
They wrote books. And in these books, all the bad guys were Jews, and they made them look bad. Big noses, bulging foreheads, always disgusting looking. And they made them the bad guys in all of the books. And they taught them. They taught them things that a German, for example, a good Aryan, let's say, had a certain circumference of his head. And so they would measure their heads, and they would measure the distance between their eyes, tell them, yes, you're a good Aryan because the distance is whatever the number is, I don't know. And the circumference is exact. And so they treated them as, you are better than the Jews. Again, telling them over and over, the Jews are vermin. We have to eradicate them. We have to exterminate them. And when you tell kids the same thing over and over and over, adults too, they start to believe it. And then when they look around and they see some guy on the street who looks like the bad guy in their book, they hate him. And so when they're told we're going to get rid of them, it works, unfortunately. There are many books, posters, movies, newspaper articles. Go online, you'll find pictures of them all over. Go to the website of the National Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. Go to Yad Vashem. Do you know how to spell that? Y-A-D, and then Vashem, V-A-S-H-E-M. It's the headquarters in Israel, where they have all the information, all the tapes. They have more stuff than you can ever think of, and they will send you things. You can find them online as well. There's a conference there this summer, in fact, that I'm going to on teaching of the Holocaust. I'm going to spend another week at Yad Vashem studying that. But there are many, many books and papers written that will show you pictures of these. I think there's one called The Magic Mushroom, if I remember correctly, that was very, very prevalent at the time. Posters in particular. The propaganda was incredible. Again, you have to give them points for that. They were brilliant when it came to the construction of the camps, the mechanics of it, the propaganda. It was a beautifully thought out plan. Luckily it didn't work. But, yes?
You don't have enough money to go to that question. Just go to Washington, D.C.
Yes.
The Holocaust Museum. It's a day well spent.
It is. It's excellent. There's also a Holocaust Museum in Atlanta, much smaller and not as good, obviously, as the DC one, but a nice trip, you know, if you can't get to DC. The Atlanta one is very good. They have some good people there that can help you. That would be the closest. There's one in Florida as well, but that's a little further, obviously. But there's lots of information out there. Just be very careful if you go to a website, what website you go to, because there are people out there who have agendas, and you have to make sure who's publishing the information, okay? And I'd also be careful if you're looking for the propaganda. I don't know about your school computers here, but you may get flagged on that, okay? I can remember doing my research on sexual abuse and got flagged on every computer I went on because of that. So just be careful, but it's out there. Books.
Could you just say one word about Holocaust deniers?
I don't understand them. I just don't understand how people can say it didn't exist, it didn't happen. Because if it didn't happen, where are all these people? I mean, we're talking millions upon millions. This is 70 years ago. How many generations of that? That's about 3 or 4 generations. So if you start with 6 million, it's got to be at least, I'm not good at math here, like 50 million people. Where are they all? If you want to know about Holocaust deniers, there's a speech this Sunday, Deborah Lipstadt. Do you know who she is? She's a professor at Emory University, Emory College, Emory University, I guess, in Atlanta. She has written a book called Denial. It's also a movie. There's a man whose name just went right out of my head, Holocaust denier, and he sued her in a British court, saying the Holocaust did not exist. And they went to trial. It's an incredible story, because she had to prove that he was a liar, making up things. In England, the proof is on the defendant to prove, not the plaintiff, okay? Not the prosecutor who has to prove his case. It's the other way around. It's the defendant. It's almost like you're guilty before you're judged innocent, you know. Watch the movie, come and hear her. She's at University of South Carolina, Sunday night. If you come up later, I can tell you what building it's in. Deborah Lipstadt, who refuses 99% of the time to even debate deniers. She just will not do it. This is a woman, and I've met her a couple of times, who is very strong-minded, and I use that very nicely. There are other descriptions. She can get very nasty about things, but she had to go to court for this one. She didn't want to. She really would just like these deniers to go away. So the book is called Denial, and so is the movie, I believe. Good a good, I don't want to say it's a good story. It's true, and it's very, I had it on silent. If you get a
Don't
chance,
seem to be playing anything.
I hate these phones. If you get a chance, go and hear her, or at least find out about her, read the book. Okay? Yes, I don't understand Holocaust deniers. I really don't. I don't understand what the purpose, well, a lot of people feel that the country of Israel was founded because of the Holocaust. And so they say, you just made it all up, just so you could get a country of your own. That's their opinion. I don't debate them either. It's a waste of time. They're not going to change their minds. Anybody else? Well, I thank you for your attention. I hope I taught you something today. I hope you enjoyed my speech. And now I'm going to get to see a little bit of Florence. I've never been here before. My son-in-law went to Francis Marion. But that's, and I can remember, I have to tell you this, when I was a kid, this is 60-some years ago, because I'm 69, I used to watch the Disney program on Sunday nights. It was the only program in color in my television. And they had stories, all different kinds of stories, and they had the swamp fox. I loved it. I used to play that with my friends. You know, I would be the swamp fox, and they would be the bad guys or the good guys. I never made the connection until I moved to South Carolina 10 years ago and discovered, my God, there really was a swamp fox, and he came from South Carolina. I had no idea that this was real. I thought it was a Disney thing. No idea. So I don't remember a lot about it, but I just remember loving swamp fox when I was a kid. Anyway, thank you again. Please make sure that you get, these are newspapers up here. You can take more than one, because I am not schlepping these back to Columbia, believe me. These are the supplements to the State Museum, the state newspaper that we've been doing for the past couple of years. The next one will come out April 6th. It's a Thursday. We've been doing it on Sunday, but they keep sticking it in with the comics, and that's not very good. So now it's on a Thursday, and we've been working very hard on these articles, use them in the classrooms. They're very, very strong, especially the one on deadly medicine, which was an exhibit that was here a couple of years ago. So come and take as many as you like. There's also a little brochure here on the memorial that is in Columbia, in the area where they have all the different memorials. This is the Holocaust Memorial. Lily Filler, who was here a couple of years ago, was the big backer of that for her parents, Lily is a Holocaust survivor. Lily's parents, sorry. Now I'm getting tired. We're Holocaust survivors. Anyway, please come up and get them.